Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this series of videos, I'm continuing my discussion on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and in this particular video, I'm going to be discussing primarily the role of violence and Freire's account of the role of violence between the oppressed and the oppressor. The conclusions that he draws aren't something that you would anticipate initially, but he justifies them with sound argumentation. And the whole point of this video discussion for this series is to conceptualize and have an understanding of Paulo Freire's account of the role of violence in his seminal text, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. With that being said, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and let's begin. Alright, so this is Alright, so again, I will have and I make available the notes that I'm using now. All you'll need to do is click the banner that pops up or click the link in the description field and it'll take you to this working PDF. This PDF, as I've said in previous videos, will expand as I continue my lecture, and you'll be able, if you don't want to listen to the lecture, just download the PDF and use it to guide your research or your reading or whatever it is that you're doing. If you don't want to read the PDF, then you can just listen to the videos. If you want to have a really holistic account, then I would recommend both listening to the videos and printing out the notes, writing the notes, your own notes in the margins, if that helps. Okay. So the first point is in Freire in this section is confronting a culture of domination. Okay. The idea of confronting a culture of domination. The first bullet point is that the perception of oppression must change among the oppressed, right? The perception of oppression must change among the oppressed. I'm not going to write that down, it's in the notes. But what does that mean? The perception of oppression must change. Well, remember we said that for Freire, the idea of oppression with respect to the oppressed population is one of submersion, right? I introduced the idea of submersion. And the whole idea behind the concept of submersion is that an individual can only think in terms of oppression. So if it's the case that individuals only think in terms of oppression, right? If it's the case that individuals only think in terms of oppression, then we can obviously see that since the individual only thinks in terms of oppression, the individual is submerged in oppression, right? So this idea of submersion, right? The idea of submersion, the idea I gave last class was think about it in terms of sort of like this water analogy, an individual being submerged underwater, right? This idea of submersion is that the oppressed population can only conceptualize power, can only conceptualize their existence in terms of oppression, right? So the perception of that oppression, this submersion, must change among the oppressed, right? And this is a transformation from submersion to recognition, right? We need to be able to identify and recognize each other for who it is that we are, not the labels that have been ascribed to us or the labels that have been prescribed to us by the oppressor. And once we can make that recognition among members of our community, then we can vie for our liberation, right? So according to Freire, this idea of confronting a culture of domination has to begin with a recognition, right? A recognition of one's submersion. And I've said this countless times in previous videos. The second bullet point is that we must acknowledge what's known as the oppressed consciousness, right? We must acknowledge what's known as the oppressed consciousness. And the question becomes, well, what is the oppressed consciousness, right? And let's talk a little bit about the oppressed, right? The oppressed consciousness. The idea of an oppressed consciousness is an idea that I cannot envisage, I cannot imagine, I do not have the cognitive abilities to conceptualize a state of affair independent to oppression. such that everything that I think of, everything that I understand, everything that I come to recognize in the world is always conceptualized as a given in terms of oppression, right? So you can think of it like this, right? You can think of it as my mind, my head, is confined within a particular space. And this space that is confining the nature of my thoughts is oppression. Right? So that oppression has a fix on my mind, right? All I can think about is oppression. All that I understand is oppression. What it's saying in this idea of the oppressive consciousness is that we, as oppressed populations, have to recognize this paradigm, right? The framework with which we think. Okay, what in the world does that mean? There's a very good example, very simple example. Imagine that I were to have a pair of blue shades, blue glasses, and they had a blue hue, a blue tint to it. If I were to take a shade of blue glasses and you were to put that shade of blue glasses over your eyes, everything that you would see in the world would change from how you see it now to everything would remain the same. The facts of the matter wouldn't change, but your interpretation of those facts would change because you would be seeing the world through this blue hue, right? The ability that the blue glasses have, the effect the blue glasses have on your eyes, doesn't change the facts of the matter. There's still chairs, there's still people, there's still pictures, there's still books, and so on. The only thing is my interpretation of these facts have changed because now I interpret these facts through this blue hue. It's exactly the same with respect to oppression. For an individual who is oppressed, what we have to recognize in this idea of oppressed consciousness is that the oppressed population only understand things, everything within the world, no matter what it might be. We'll just label it X. It could be X, it could be labeled Y, it could be Z, it could be friendship, it could be family, it could be economics, it could be personal development, it could be educational expectations or what have you. Everything that the oppressed individual experiences in the world is filtered through this hue of oppression. So that all I see around me, hence the idea of submersion, all that I see around me is oppression. And all that I interpret around me is oppression. Even my own existence is interpreted in relationship to oppression, right? This submersion in oppression, this infiltration of this hue of oppression constructs my mind to think only in terms of oppression. And what do? I propagate, right? I proliferate, I replicate this concept of oppression, right? And this is problematic. So the way that we fight the oppressed consciousness is recognizing that the interpretations that we have in reality, the interpretations, not in reality, the interpretations that I have of reality are such that they're constructed by this framework that I have, right? And this framework being oppression. So all I need to do is just remove this box, right? All I need to do is remove this framework and I free myself from an oppressive interpretation. And then I can see the facts as they are. With respect to Freire's account of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this would be the recognition of a human being as a human being. It's that simple, right? It's just a recognition of a human being as a human being, and not as an object, not as the thing. I think I'm going to talk about that in this discussion. Okay, bullet point number 3, we must acknowledge oppressor consciousness, right? Oppressor consciousness. So we have the oppressed consciousness, and I talked about that, right? The oppressed consciousness is the idea that the framework with which I come to understand reality is always interpreted within the purview of oppression. Right? It's always interpreted within the purview of oppression. The oppressor consciousness is different, right?